Welcome back to the News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. It's the Vince Colonnese Show. I'm not Vince. I'm Vince's producer, Corey Inganamort, filling in for my buddy. He'll be back on Monday. Don't you worry. I'm just here for one day, and it is my great honor to fill in for Vince in the meantime. Coming up at 4:30 today, Jon Schweppe will be here. He's the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for the American Principles Project. They just did an $18 million ad buy in swing states targeting Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. We're going to discuss what they're really focused on, and we'll talk to you. 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. By now, you know, tragedy struck in Georgia yesterday when a deranged young man, 14 years old, named Colt Gray, shut up a school. He killed 2 students and 2 teachers, and this was completely preventable for quite a number of reasons. One of them being that he was on the FBI's watch list. Back in May of 2023, the FBI actually visited his home, met with his father, met with him, because this young individual, well, he was making threats on a group chat called Discord that he was going to shoot up a middle school. The FBI knew that this guy was a threat, yet somehow he was able to acquire a gun through his father, who apparently gifted him one in Christmas of last year. Totally illegal. Now the father is facing charges. It's believed to be the first time, at least that I've been able to research, that a father, a parent of an individual who is shooting, is being charged with manslaughter. It's all just a tragic, completely preventable story. And I want to dive in through the details of just how preventable it actually was with my next guest, John Lott. He's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He's also the author of Gun Control Myths, and he joins me on the program right now. John, welcome to the program.
Oh, it's great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So, top line takeaways. This did not have to happen 2 days ago. What went wrong?
Well, I mean, a number of things went wrong. But look, one of the problems that you have is that the government has a hard time really identifying people, or at least following through and preventing them. And to me, the question then becomes, what's the backup plan? Because there's lots of these cases. You look at the Buffalo mass murder from a couple of years ago. At the end of the school year, a teacher had asked him what he was planning on doing. Over the summer, he said he was going to find a school, shoot it up, and then commit suicide. She was alarmed. Had him interviewed by 2 psychological experts. He was flagged. The 2 psychological experts questioned him, and he said, look, it was a dumb joke. I shouldn't have said it. And they took him at his word, and they passed him through. Obviously, the Nashville school shooter from last year was someone who had been through a lot of psychiatric help. In fact, one of the things that you see is that over half of the mass public shooters in the last 25 years were actually seeing mental health care professionals within about 6 months or so of their attack. And yet in not one single case did those mental health professionals, some of them world-recognized experts, identify the attacker as a danger to himself or others. And so, it'd be nice if there was some magic bullet to make sure that there weren't mistakes in terms of identifying these people. But given the rate that we have of these mistakes, my question is, what's a backup plan? And the backup plan, one thing you see with these school shootings is that all the school shootings in the United States since 2000 at least, where anybody's been injured or killed, have all occurred in places where teachers and staff are banned from having guns. Georgia allows school districts to let teachers and staff carry concealed, but they have to get approval of the school district, and there's only 3 counties in Georgia that allow it. Nationwide, we have something like over 10,000 schools in the United States that have teachers or staff carrying, with over 20 states that allow it. And there hasn't been one attack where anybody's been killed or injured at any of those schools. All the attacks occur at places where they're banned. And, I know there was a school resource officer in this case who stopped the attack, and that's great. But what people have to understand is what an incredibly difficult job these school resource officers have in this case.
Mm-hmm.
If you have one person with a gun in uniform, so he's readily identifiable, you give huge tactical advantages to the attacker. The attacker can wait for the officer to leave the area, or he can move on to another target himself, or if he decides he wants to go there, who do you think he tries to take out first? But I'll just leave you with this question.
Mm-hmm.
We have air marshals. Would anybody have air marshals in uniform? What sense would that make to make air marshals have to wear uniforms? Would anybody advocate that? I assume not.
Yeah,
if you're going to have, if you're going to have a school resource officer at a school, have them dressed like a regular staff person, have them do a regular staff job at the same time, so they're not readily identifiable as the one person that's going to have a gun there. And then rather than have a sign in front of the school that says this school is a gun-free zone, have a sign in front of the school that says select people at this school are carrying concealed and will use their guns to protect the students and others at the school there. These guys may be crazy in some sense, but they're not stupid.
Right.
Time after time, when you read the diaries and manifestos, and the media just drives me nuts because they absolutely refuse to report on the comments that these murderers make on these things. But time after time, the murderers will say their goal is to get media coverage. And they know the more people they kill, the more media coverage they can get. And so they explicitly, time after time, say they're going to go to a place where people are banned from having guns. The Nashville killer, we just had the diary finally, the full diary finally come out. She had looked at several places, but had decided not to because there were people with guns at those places that she felt could be able to stop her. So she picked the Covenant School to go after.
Yeah,
but that's not unique.
Yeah, of course. And those schools that do have resource officers, the resource officers are expected to do their job when called upon. When you take Parkland, for example, the guy abandoned his duties entirely. He ran scared. Uvalde, same situation. The police officers were letting these poor children just be shot at, and they abandoned their duties entirely. So
now here's the thing on that,
mm-hmm.
and that is, everybody wants to believe they'll be a hero and run towards gunfire when it's happening. The thing is, if you're a teacher or a staff member in the school that's being attacked, so in Parkland, the guy didn't want to go inside the building. He wanted to stay outside. When the other officers arrived, they hid behind a car outside. With Uvalde, when they arrived, they just couldn't get the guts to go into the classroom that was there. Mm-hmm. Even though they regularly heard, shots being fired and were getting calls from kids inside the room there. But the thing is, if you're a teacher or a staff member and the killer is coming towards you and you're already in the school there, hiding behind your desk may not be, the safest option even for you. You may have no other choice other than to defend yourself. But the point is, if you make it so that these guys don't know who it is that they have to worry about, if you take away the tactical advantages and put up a sign that says, warning, rather than telling them it's a gun-free zone, these guys respond to that. There's a reason why 94% of the mass public shootings in the United States over the last 25 years have occurred in places where guns are banned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. Let's talk a little bit about how this individual acquired his gun. So he was born and grew up in a household which was, as reported, very troubled. There was domestic abuse. He was bullied. Apparently the father didn't treat the son so well. But in response to him being bullied at school, the father thought it was a good idea to teach him guns, which, on an outside perspective, I grew up with guns and my father taught me guns. It's a good hobby and it's a good thing to learn. Now, this kid started making threats on an app to a bunch of school students that he was speaking with. He said, quote, according to CNN, I'm going to, quote, shoot up a middle school. And later that year, this was in May of 2023, later that year for Christmas, after the FBI already visited their home to do some questioning, the father bought his son a gun, apparently an AR-15, according to CNN. how do we prevent a deranged individual who's already made threats about shooting up a school? He shouldn't be allowed to own this gun, should he? And the father right now is being charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. Who bears the most responsibility here?
All right. Well, first of all, this isn't the first time that parents are being held responsible. There was a case in Michigan, a school shooting that had occurred there, where both the mother and father were sentenced to like 10 years in jail because of the attack. But here's the deal. That type of threat is a crime. And the question is, if it's clear that he wrote those messages, I mean, I have no idea what transpired. I have no idea why the FBI, why the government didn't arrest the kid at the time, charge him as a juvenile if they want to do that. But I assume they couldn't actually make the connection that he's the one who sent out the messages. Of course, there's a reason why they went and interviewed him. They must have had pretty strong suspicions. Right. Let's put it this way. If they were able to clearly identify him as the one who made those threats, then the question is, why the heck didn't the FBI, why didn't the government arrest him? Right. Why didn't they take him in for psychological evaluations? Every state, including Georgia, has what they call civil commitment type laws. Mm-hmm. If you believe somebody is a danger to themselves or others, you can take them in if you think there's a reasonable probability. And if the guy's making those types of explicit threats, take them in for an evaluation. And if the psychological experts agree that there's a reasonable probability, again, a 20% chance, there can be an immediate hearing. If the person can't afford a lawyer, once provided, there'll be witnesses, testimony will be taken. And then the judge has a range of options. You can say, if you go and voluntarily see a mental health care professional, we'll have you come back in a week or two and reevaluate. They could take away the person's gun. They could go, in the most extreme case, civilly commit the person. There are other things that they could do. They could treat it as a criminal case if they wanted to. Right. And so my question is, if the FBI, didn't think that there was strong enough evidence, if they didn't think it was a clear enough case, why should they believe that there's a clear enough evidence in case for the father?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question that we just don't know yet. I would assume the defense would argue that you can't prove that it was me who sent those text messages, and
But then if they can't prove it,
yep.
The question is, why is there a different standard, a burden for the father believing? Maybe the kid said, "I didn't do it, Dad. I swear, I didn't do it." Mm-hmm. And the father said, "Okay, I believe you." Right. In the Michigan case, you had that kid. He had gone to the school counselor. He had seen other people that were there. They didn't think he was that serious of a danger. And the question is, if these mental health care experts don't think that somebody is that type of danger, why is it that the parents should have the obligation?
Right,
right. Look, I understand the desire to hold somebody responsible for this type of thing. And I think that's basically what happened in the Michigan case. The people in the community were outraged, as they obviously should be. Somebody dropped the ball in that case. But look, we've seen this type of thing happen time after time. You look at Parkland. Nicholas Cruz, the murderer there, had something like 45 times the sheriff's office had come out to his home for complaints about violence. He had knocked out his mom's teeth. He had gotten her into the hospital. He had broken her jaw. He had beaten her up multiple times. Mm-hmm. The school, he had caused lots of problems at school. And yet nothing was ever done. The sheriff's office, is the sheriff's office liable because even though he beat up and really did horrible physical damage to the mom there, right, that they didn't do anything? Should the school be liable? I mean, here you have mental health care experts at the school who had evaluated him. And the issue is, as I mentioned before, over half the mass public shootings in the last 25 years were actually seeing mental health care professionals, and not in one single case. In the Santa Barbara shooting case, the killer there was seeing 3 mental health care professionals. One of them was the head of child services, psychiatric services at Los Angeles Children's Hospital. He was considered an internationally recognized expert on youth violence. And he didn't identify the young man as a danger to himself or others.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And,
yeah.
And so, one can go and talk about, you see, the thing is, with mental health care people, in fact, there's a whole mental health care literature about their inability to identify these individuals as dangers to themselves or others.
Right.
And they say, take something like schizophrenia. There's like 2.5 million Americans that suffer schizophrenia in any given year. You can go and, in the last 25 years, there's been 1, possibly 2 of the mass public shooters who had schizophrenia. So if you were to go and identify the 1,000 people that you thought of the 2.5 million that you thought were most likely to engage in that type of attack, you'd be wrong at least 999 of those 1,000 times that were there.
Yeah.
And so the mental health professionals have all these excuses for why they can't, or explanations for why they can't do it.
Yeah. No, it all makes sense. And the instinct can't be to disarm and then figure out why. They need a real and actual scientific reason to disarm these mentally ill people. John, I always learn so much from you when you join the show. Thank you so much. We got to leave it there for now. John Lott, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks again to John Lott. He's always so knowledgeable on everything guns, crime, everything affecting our communities. On that story, CNN's reporting more on this. In those messaging apps that Colt Gray was on, he said at one point, quote, "I'm committing a mass shooting and I'm waiting a good 2 to 3 years." That's a red flag. He said, "I can't kill myself yet because I'm not contributing anything to culture. I need to go out knowing I did." And then in these messages, he referenced Adam Lanza. He was the Sandy Hook killer. And then he also said in a separate post that he shared a desire to target an elementary school and expressed frustration with the acceptance of transgender people. He was frustrated with the acceptance of transgender people. Are we not accepting enough? Maybe that was his thoughts. What are his motivations? We have still so much more to learn. I'd like to take your phone calls. We'll get to those coming up. But after this break, Jon Schweppe joins the Vince Coglianese Show. I'm Corey Inganamort, in for Vince. Welcome back to News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. It's the Vince Coglianese Show. I'm Corey Inganamort, filling in for my buddy Vince. He has the day off. He'll be back Monday. Don't you worry. You can call into the program. We got to take some calls today. 888-630-9625. 888-630-WMAL. Whatever you want to talk about. Everything is on the table. American Principles Project. They are launching a new campaign ad in a number of swing states, including Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They're targeting Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and their dangerous policies when it comes to transgenderism and trying to infiltrate our school libraries with sexually explicit material. Here's one of those ads brought to you by the American Principles Project, set to air very soon in swing states.
What does Kamala Harris actually believe? Kamala backs taxpayer-funded sex change procedures for minors. She supports men competing in girls' sports. And incredibly, Kamala even advocates for sexually explicit books in elementary school libraries. Vote against Kamala Harris. She's not just liberal, she's dangerously liberal.
Joining me now is the Director of Policy and Government Affairs over at the American Principles Project, the group responsible for these ads, Jon Schweppe. John, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. So what's with these ads you're airing? Where will they be airing? When will they be airing? And why is it so important to get the message out of how dangerously liberal Kamala Harris and Tim Walz actually is, especially on this issue of men competing in women's sports, men exposing themselves in women's locker rooms? Tell me about these new ads you're launching.
Yeah, so we are up actually now on the air, and also doing digital and all sorts of stuff. 7 states. We're going to do $18 million total in the election cycle. And basically what we're trying to do is get the message out to voters, some of these swing voters that we're targeting, about how extreme Kamala Harris actually is. Right now, if you see Harris's ads, all she's talking about, she literally has pictures of the wall in some of her ads, basically trying to get people to think she's this moderate. And we know, this is a California liberal. She's one of the most extreme people out there. And what we've found in our polling and our focus groups is that, her extremism on this transgender stuff, her opposition to parental rights, her willingness to show obscene books to kids in elementary schools, this is stuff that really separates voters from her. They really don't like it. And so we're making sure to get that message out. And, we think it's going to be a critical part of helping Trump win in November.
It's one of the issues that actually has bipartisan support, where nobody's for this. 80, look at public polling, I think 70, 80%, something like that, actually oppose men pretending to be women competing in women's sports. Yet Donald Trump is losing right now the college-educated suburban mom vote. Make it make sense. If you're a mother or a father with girls, young girls, I don't know, 9, 5, whatever the age are, and sitting back, not necessarily voting for Donald Trump, even sitting it out, voting for Kamala Harris, you are exposing your daughters to danger should they reach power. Why in the world are suburban mothers and, not so much fathers, but especially the suburban mothers actually planning to vote for Kamala Harris? Is it because they just don't know about this?
I think that's a big part of it. What happens is that they see that, Trump sends out mean tweets, or, maybe they're thinking about abortion or whatever, and that's affecting their vote. But the reality is, even some of these liberal suburban women we found in our focus groups are moved by this stuff. They don't think kids should be getting sex changes. They don't think men should be competing against women in sports. And they really, this is like one of the strongest issues out there. They really don't think we should be showing pornographic books to children in schools. And that's why, by the way, you see Democrats, they talk about book bans. They're doing their best to, insulate themselves from this attack because they know it's so brutal. And, the reality is this is just their I don't know if it's like a graduate school thing, like you go to graduate school and all of a sudden you think that women can be men. I don't know what it is, but this educated elite class, they are obsessed with the trans issues. It's all they care about. And that's just not where normal voters, even normal Democrat voters, are.
Yeah, and this crazy, very weird, by the way, VP nominee Tim Walz, he's appropriately named Tampon Tim because he wants to publicly fund tampons in not just women's rooms, but men's rooms. And the left will say, oh, what's the big deal? It's whatever. If you're not going to use a tampon, then just don't use it. But this is much deeper than that. It's not so much women who think that they're men using that restroom and then using the tampons because only women can use tampons. It is endorsing the idea, which is even the more dangerous part of this, that a woman can become a man, and conversely, a man can become a woman. So just by putting tampons in the bathroom, Tim Walz and Kamala Harris endorse the idea that men can use women's locker rooms. It's so much bigger than just, if you don't need a tampon, then don't use it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think, and our ads really try to get at this. A lot of people, I think Americans tend to be kind of folk libertarians where they're just like, look, whatever you want to do. They aren't like that with kids, right? They absolutely don't think that kids should be able to do this stuff. And they also, there's limits to that. They think, for example, we have Paula Scanlon, who was a UPenn swimmer who swam with Leah Thomas, right? Paula talks about how Leah would change in front of the girls in the locker room and expose himself. And like, this is where you draw the line, right? And the reality is that Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, their policies, they support this. They want our laws to basically say that a man who identifies as transgender should have full access to everything women have, to all of their private spaces. It's really wrong. And I think, again, we're talking to people in Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, these critical swing states. They're not on board with this weird Acela corridor view on what transgenderism, on gender, just writ large.
Yeah, of course not. And Paula Scanlon, I've had the privilege of meeting her a few times. She's a friend of the Vince Coglianese show. She said this in public testimony to Congress, so I'm not violating any privacy here or whatever. She was actually sexually assaulted as a young teenager. To deal with that trauma and then having to be present to a man exposing himself in her locker room, which she says, I think it was 18 times a week. This is what she had to do. And then she went to UPenn to complain about it. And they said, no, Paula Scanlon, you're the problem. You need to be more accepting, and you need to accept that man thinks he's a woman and therefore he is a woman. Here is that ad with Paula Scanlon and American Principles Project.
My name is Paula Scanlon, and I was a Division I swimmer at the University of Pennsylvania. I've spent all my life training to be the best swimmer I could be, but nothing could have prepared me for showering with a man. As a woman, there is nothing more violating than being forced to compete and share locker rooms with men. Dangerous Democrats like Kamala Harris support policies that would silence women like me and force us to compete against men. It's just not fair.
Yeah, horrific. And that should obviously resonate with undecided or even left-leaning voters. I'm not a one-issue voter, but if I was, this is a non-starter. People always say, we got more in common than we don't with the left. And my response is, I'm sorry, if you think that men can expose themselves to women, we have nothing to talk about. I'm not even interested in being your friend anymore, to be honest. Right. It's such a non-starter. And I think the more people that are exposed to this type of information, the more people will obviously come on board and deny this presidency that Kamala Harris is seeking. And also in Minnesota, they got these crazy laws up there that Tim Walz has endorsed. He wants to make Minnesota a sanctuary state for trans students. So the state could actually take your child away if you as a parent says, no, Billy, you're not going to be Sally from now on. That's extreme, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is actually the reality. We have 25 states that have passed protections on our side, right, that have passed protections for kids against the transgender industry. But the reality is that states like Minnesota, you look at Iowa. Iowa has a ban on sex changes for kids. Minnesota has a law that basically says that, if a kid crosses the border and comes there with any adult and they want to get sex change procedures, they basically won't give the kid back to the parents, right? I mean, it's actually pretty incredible stuff. And so, what we're doing, look, you look at these polls, and when you ask voters, what issues do you care about? They always tell you inflation, immigration, crime, and those issues matter. But they're not thinking top of mind about some of this stuff. But this stuff is shocking. It's shocking extremism. And once they learn about this, it just totally disqualifies Kamala Harris, Tim Walz in their mind. And so you see the Trump campaign, you see even Senate Republicans starting to message using this issue. I think it's going to be critical, and I think it's going to be a big part of why we win in 2024.
I sure hope so. The left's platform is basically eliminating the role and responsibility of parents altogether. If a parent can't make the rules in the house, when a child says, I'm actually the opposite gender, and a parent can't say no, they want to limit parenting altogether. And that's kind of their goal from the get-go. They want to destroy the nuclear family so that maybe their public school system can actually raise them and they can become these social justice warriors that you see running amok on colleges and supporting Hamas and all this. It all starts in the family when they're growing up, and the left is determined, dead set, to destroy any role that parents ever have. I got one more audio bite I want to play for you. This is also from American Principles Project. It features a detransitioner, Laura Becker, who was fooled by the medical industry into changing genders, in air quotes, because there's no such thing.
When I was 19 years old, doctors led me to believe that I was transgender. I was told that hormones and surgeries were my only options. They were wrong. Now I suffer from irreversible changes to my body and mind that I will live with for the rest of my life. Today, Kamala Harris is pushing children into these procedures, limiting their choices later in life. That's why I'm voting for Donald Trump, because he's committed to protecting children from these rash decisions.
Jon Schweppe, do you think the issue of transgenderism will come up at the debate on Tuesday on ABC? And if it does, will they call it gender-affirming care?
Oh, almost certainly. The media is absolutely complicit in this. And, 10 years ago, 10 years from now, when we overcome this and we achieve justice for all these detransitioners like Laura Becker, we're going to have to hold the media accountable too, because they've been the ones promoting this so much. But, I just want to say, folks like Laura, Chloe Cole, these people are so courageous to step up. What happened to Laura was just unbelievable. They butchered her body. They harmed her. That's a female. And listen to what happened to her voice. I mean, it's really horrific what these people do, and you should be upset about it. And that should be going into your vote in November. And again, that's why we're trying to get this message out to folks. You hear these testimonials. It's really powerful. And, I think it's going to affect the way people look at Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Yeah, and the left, they'll try to say you're wrong because, this is just such a marginalized community. We need to promote and accept and bring them with open arms. And, it's just it's less than 1% of the population. So what does it matter if this man is playing in a league of volleyball with women? It actually doesn't affect just that one person who considers them the opposite sex. It affects the entire league. Tell that to, let's say there's one trans person playing in a league of 200 volleyball girl players. That affects 201 people. It's not just this one person. Just take that the North Carolina volleyball player who still suffers brain injuries and concussions because a man spiked it on her forehead. This affects way more than just the marginalized communities that they're trying to tell us exists, and it's absolutely reprehensible.
But they're marginalizing them. I think that's what's so frustrating about this. These are victims of the left. Mm-hmm. Putting them in a position where they're going to be sterilized, their bodies are going to be permanently mutilated because they're being sold this false bill of goods. I think it's really critical that we frankly stand up for people who are suffering from gender dysphoria and try to get them the help they actually need, as opposed to these, this awful transgender industry that's trying to exploit them for profit. Right.
They obviously need some mental health. But God forbid we're supposed to end the stigma of mental health, but God forbid you tell one of these people to get some mental health. Well, you're just a transphobe. You're a bigot. End of conversation. So the whole farce that we need to end the stigma of mental health, I agree with that. You got a problem? Let's get some health. I'm not going to stigmatize you for that. But the second you request someone get help, well, then you're the hateful bigot. And there's just no winning with this anymore. But Jon Schweppe, before I let you go, just because I know you follow this all so closely and social media is one of your expertise, what do you make of these new allegations by Merrick Garland and Joe Biden that, Russia is interfering in this next election, trying to help Donald Trump get elected? You got some thoughts on that you want to share?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I think there's actually a lot of foreign money that goes into our elections that we should be concerned about. And you'd love to see equal justice from DOJ in terms of looking at all the Chinese money, all the Qatari money and all that. And that won't happen. This does look like a case where there is actually something there, and a lot of people were swept onto it as victims. But, frankly, I just think a lot of the stuff with the Russia is trying to tag all this to Donald Trump, and they're trying to use it in the political sense. And voters are smart. They're not going to fall for that, I think, in November.
Of course. Well, Jon Schweppe, the Director of Policy and Government Affairs for the American Principles Project, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your expertise, and I hope to do it again soon, okay? The call-in number is 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. That's what Chris in Fairmont dialed. He's on line 1, and he joins the Vince Colonnade Show. Chris, welcome to the program.
Hey, Corey. How you doing?
I'm doing great. What's on your mind?
Like I was telling the call screener, the left playbook used to be incrementalism. They used to take something that was slightly out of the ordinary and slowly try to make it more ordinary. You can pick the subject of whatever it is, but they totally abandon and they are full on. Let's just go with our feelings on this.
Radicals.
I mean, radical.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter if it's support for Hamas, it's transgenderism. I mean, look at it. In my opinion, I've been following politics for a long time. I'm 54 years old. It started with Obama. He said marriage between is a man and a woman, and then later he said he had evolved, and that was the green light at that point to start.
Yeah, and that was only, 10, 15 years ago at this point? Look where we are now.
Exactly.
You're a bigot if you don't think men can expose themselves.
And look how fast it happened. Like I said, it used to be incremental, and now it is exponentially growing.
Yeah, it's not the foot in the door mentality. It is the door in the face mentality. They ask for it all, and we push back. Well, they only have to give up so much. The answer is to destroy them completely, accept none of it. And I think you're onto something, Chris. That's exactly what they do. Your call's next, 888-630-9625. Got a lot more to get to. New jobs numbers out. The AP is acting disgusting again, attacking J.D. Vance unfairly. We'll talk all that next after this break.